One thing that can be really tricky with parenting our teenagers is when we set rules or boundaries and your kid is saying that no one else as parents set those kinds of boundaries. So if you're really wondering, am I too strict? Am I too lenient? How do we navigate that when our kids think we're being too strict, or they're probably not complaining if they think you're too lax? I will say one thing about that though. Kids feel loved when people care enough to set rules and boundaries. So what you'll hear kids who say, my parents really don't care what I do, say is that sometimes that makes them not feel quite as loved. So it's good to be protective. It's good to have limits and boundaries because it lets our kids know that we're paying attention, we care about their well-being, etc. Okay, so an example that came to my attention is about a 16-year-old whose friends are driving. Okay. And you all know the law in California that if you're 16 and you're a new driver, you're not supposed to have other teenagers in your car for a year or whatever the specifics are. So this kid though is saying, this teenager is saying, you know, my other friends are riding with their newly licensed friends, and accuses the parents of being too protective. The parents have tried to reason with her, but it's not working. She's seeing social media posts. My friends are having fun when they're in the car. Everyone's doing it. Why are you so protective, etc. So the parents are wondering, are we being too protective? Should we let go of our boundary here, or should we just persist in our position? So while I can't answer that question for you, because it's dependent on so many things. It's dependent on your kid. It's dependent on your kid's friend group, on your kid's friend group's parents, and what your values are as a family. So there are many, many things to consider as you're navigating situations like this. So I want to just talk to you about some general guidelines and some things to think about as you're having to make these kinds of decisions. The first is to keep connected to other parents. So even when your kids are 15, 16, 17, moving into 18, it can be really helpful to still be in touch. You're not setting up play dates like you used to when they were little, but it can be so helpful to be connected to your kids' friends, parents. So, you know, building those relationships, you don't have to know them well, but even just sending a text saying, hey, we're trying to figure out how to navigate this, you know, this party that's coming up that I know some of the kids are going to, or we're feeling like we're not comfortable with our kid riding with like newly licensed drivers yet, but we're not sure if we're being too strict. How are y'all handling it in your family, etc. My experience is that parents can have a pretty big impact on each other when it comes to what we'll call positive parental peer pressure. So I remember a specific time when our kid was in middle school and he was on a baseball team where he was one of the youngest kids, and some of the older boys had decided to go see a movie that was rated R and really inappropriate. And I didn't feel comfortable with our kid at the time going. And we said no. Literally everyone else on the team went. It wasn't just when kids say everyone else is doing it, which you know is not necessarily true. In this case, literally every other team member went. And our son was so angry with us. And, you know, obviously he felt left out. He was trying so much to be, especially as the younger kid, to have social traction. And, you know, really what we did was we just had empathy with him while we held to our boundaries, where we were like, you know, I'm sorry that it's so disappointing, and it's okay that you feel angry with me. And I understand why, you know, that's really upsetting to you, and I'm not changing my mind. You're not ready to go and see this movie. In those cases, we can have empathy, saying, you know, yes to our child's feelings about it, even while we're saying no to a particular behavior. But what was really interesting to me was that a couple of the other parents who had said yes messaged me afterwards and said, I really wanted to say no. I didn't feel like that was an appropriate movie for my kid either, but I didn't have the guts to say no. And after you said it, I really wish I had said no. And I wish we could have talked about it ahead of time. It was one of those spontaneous things. So keep in mind, there may be other parents who are wanting to hold those boundaries too, but are feeling like they're the only ones being that strict too. So as you guys talk to each other, sharing, you know, like, hey, we're trying to figure this out. What are you guys doing? Or how are you thinking about this? Those kinds of things can be really helpful. And you can really have an impact for your kids in beneficial ways if the adults are staying connected and holding similar boundaries. That can be really great. Not everybody's going to agree, but at least it kind of lets other parents know what you're thinking, what you're doing. That can be really helpful. Another thing is to think about the process of decision making. What I mean by that is that really, especially once our kids are teenagers, if not before, when we as parents do top-down command and demand, where we're like, this is what's happening and this is how it is. I don't care what you think or feel. We really shouldn't be doing that, particularly with our teenagers, because for one reason, we can't force them to do or not do anything truly, unless we are willing to call law enforcement or go down that path, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But we really want to be modeling and coaching our children in how we make good informed decisions. So when it comes to this kind of thing, talking through with your teenager, what are the consequences, right? So like, what would happen to your friend if they got pulled over and there were other teenagers in the car? Your kid probably doesn't know what the consequences are of that. So you might want to say, we want to put the responsibility on them to do the research, to investigate in order to make informed decisions. So really to say, we can't even make a fully informed decision unless we have these bits of information, including, what do your friends' parents feel about this? Are they okay with kids riding in their car, knowing that they may be liable, etc.? So really making sure that the responsibility is on them to research, investigate, to make informed decision. What are the consequences? We also want to walk through, what are the pros? What are the cons? How are they navigating risk? One of the things I often did for my sons when they would want to do something that I was uncomfortable with is I would often say, I need some time to think about it. So they often knew that if they really wanted to do something, I might not be able to make a decision right in that moment. Also, they knew what kinds of questions I would ask. So I would say, okay, well, what do you think I need to know before I say yes or no? And again, putting the burden on them to lay out the details. Then I might ask a question like, I'm sure you can imagine what risks I'm concerned about. So can you tell me what risks you think there are and how you're going to handle the risks in order to keep yourself safe? Again, really putting the burden on them, but you're really modeling the process of informed decision making. Okay, so that's another big piece of it. Next, I would say it's really important, again, to not get into that threat, punishment, forcing our kids to do things. We really do need to work with them. And so, you as the parent absolutely need to decide what your values are. In your family, you may decide, look, we don't break the law in any way, shape, and form. Or you may say, we are law abiding, but there are certain exceptions that we feel like are probably okay, and we're willing to face the consequences if it comes to that. But keep in mind, there are things that you absolutely won't and shouldn't compromise on. And those typically come down to safety kinds of things. Just like when your kid, would want to swim alone, that was not okay. You knew that wasn't safe, and that was not an option. So you said either you have to have an adult watching you or you cannot swim. Okay. So there are things that you just cannot work with your teen on. You just have really strong beliefs or science to back you up around a boundary or limit you set. But that's probably less than 1% of these kinds of decisions. There will be other decisions that you just go, you know what? This is not worth the battle. This isn't that important to me. The risks aren't that high, etc. And so there are going to be things you let go of. This is actually a really great framework that I learned from Ross Greene, who wrote all kinds of books. But he calls them baskets, right? Or buckets. So basket A is like, you're holding your position no matter what. Basket C is expectations you can let go of, or things that aren't worth kind of chasing after. And then there's bucket B. And he said most things fall into bucket B. And that is really where we do what he calls collaborative problem solving. And so this is really where, instead of getting into the threat punishment loop, you figure out which compromises are okay, which ones aren't. I think we also get into a really rigid thinking where we're like, either we're strict or we're permissive, or which kinds of parents are we going to be? But actually there's a lot of in between. So it might be that besides the things you won't compromise on, and the things you give up altogether, there are a lot of these in between moments. So you might work with your kid and say, look, here are my concerns. How are you going to address those? So you walk through all the informed decision-making, and ultimately you may say, look, I'm really uncomfortable with this, but I'm open to hearing from you some ways that we could navigate this. And again, totally personal decision-making. I'm not advocating any which way. But it might be, because we have this example for thinking about a compromise, that let's say their best friend is driving. You really trust that best friend. You've checked in with that best friend's parents, and they're comfortable with their child driving your child. And you say you can ride in the car only with this one person, and only to and from school events or athletic practices, or on the way home from school. But on the weekends, I'm not comfortable with that, like if it's dark or whatever. So really working together to figure out what is something that my teen and I can come together on. So Ross Greene also talks about basically sayings like, I hear what you're saying is that you want to do this. Here's what I want to do. How can we find something that works for both of us? And if your teen says, well, what's going to work is for me to get to do whatever I want, then you can say, well, that works for you, but that doesn't work for me. So we've got to find a way to listen to each other and come up with things. Okay, so keeping in mind, finally, is that it's much more these moments as parents and these conversations we have with our kids than just that one decision. Yes, those decisions matter, they're important, but you're also communicating a lot about your relationship, how well you handle it when they come to you, how well your kids also getting information about how well you handle it when you find out that they've done something wrong. Are they feeling free to come to you? Are they feeling free to come to you with situations that are tricky, where they feel like they can really be honest with you? You're also communicating how much you trust them. You're communicating what your values are. So there's a lot more that's being communicated other than just that one decision. Another thing that's just really important to keep in mind with that in mind as well is that it's really important that we hold our children in mind when we're having these conversations. Some of our children are much more mature at certain ages than our other children are. Yes, it's important to be as fair as we can as parents, but it's really about protecting our children, holding them in mind. And I know lots of times when I become really rigid around something, either it's for a really good reason. And so when I say to my kids, I'm not changing my mind about this, but I'm open to working with them on most other things, then they know that that's really important to me and that it matters and that I'm thinking it through, and after I've listened to them. So I'm not just saying, do what I say and I don't want to hear about it. Again, that communicates, don't talk to me about things, don't come to me. So we want to be really thoughtful about that. But I know the times as parent when I end up going into the lecture mode, when I end up, going back over and over and over about something that my kid has already heard about, that my kid already knows, typically it's because I'm feeling some anxiety and fear about it. And it's so much better when I either notice that I'm feeling really afraid about something, and then I want to go, okay, I'm going to really listen to that, and then I'm going to make a boundary here, or I'm being really in a fear-based mentality, and that's not logical. It's not sound reasoning that I'm using, or I've already done it. I've already lectured my kid over and over and over about something, and I keep going back to it. And then to go to them and say, you know what, I was feeling afraid, and so I kept saying all that stuff to you to make myself feel better, but I wasn't listening to you, and I'm sorry about that. So we can make repairs with our kids when we do that. So here are the points summed up. One is Keep connected to other parents with positive parental peer pressure. Number 2, the process of decision-making is important. Instead of it being top down, go with a more coaching consultant approach where you're really helping them navigate and learn how to make good, strong decisions. Number 3, work with your team, collaborate, decide which things are okay for you and your family and which things are not, and feel comfortable in setting your boundaries where you need to for safety things. And then work with your kid on the rest. Remember, it's not either strict parenting or permissive parenting. There's a lot of in between. And then number 4, it's remembering that the way you communicate and the way you handle these conversations with your kid also communicates a lot to them about your values, how much you trust them, and really how safe they should be in talking to you about things and navigating tricky things, thinking through decision-making that they're making as well. And finally, number 5, make sure you're having a lot of insight into yourself and being aware of yourself and how you're coming across. I'll say in conclusion that oftentimes what we do in these kinds of situations is we lecture our kids and we tell them all kinds of things they already know and that we've already said to them, and then we start losing our voice. So make sure that either you're asking your kid, like, you give me the lecture, tell me what you think I need to hear in order to feel comfortable here, or just say, I trust that you already know all the safety things, so just help me feel confident in that and tell me what you think we need to go over, etc. So just keep that in mind as you navigate these really tricky waters. It's typically not the case that everyone is getting to do something. It may be that their small group of friends is getting to do that. But again, reach out to other parents and trust yourself. Trust your kid to the degree that they have earned that trust. Know that this is a risky, tricky time, and you just have to make the best decisions that you can make around this call and lots of others to come, with the goal in mind of helping your child move more and more toward responsible decision-making, because they're going to get to make all of these decisions on their own in a very short period of time. So we're always scaffolding towards that goal. Good luck to you.